That night, the castle didn't breathe. The servants moved through corridors like ghosts, their footsteps muffled, their eyes cast down. They knew the air itself had changed, heavy, cold, suffocating. Something had broken in the world's natural order, and when the king's chamber door slammed open at midnight, every soul within those ancient walls understood. Someone had made a fatal mistake. The hunt had begun before the first scream ever left her lips. The rain arrived without warning. It fell in violent sheets against the arched windows of Thornfield Manor, a Gothic fortress carved into cliffs overlooking the Black Sea. Inside, the corridors stretched endlessly, lit only by iron chandeliers whose flames flickered as if afraid of their own shadows. The stone walls held centuries of secrets, bloodstains scrubbed clean but never forgotten, whispers that never quite died. Illyra moved through the dim hallway with practiced silence, her fingers trailing along the cold stone. She had learned, in her months here, that invisibility was survival. The manor wasn't just a home. It was a living entity that watched, judged, and remembered. She wore a simple gray dress, the fabric worn soft from too many washes, and her dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing the pale column of her throat. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried the silver tray, tea that had gone cold an hour ago, forgotten in some empty room. A servant's life in Thornfield was measured in breaths held and eyes averted, but tonight felt different. The air tasted metallic, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Illyra paused at the end of the corridor, her heart suddenly racing for reasons she couldn't name. The king's wing lay ahead, a place she'd been warned never to enter uninvited. Yet something pulled at her, a magnetic dread she couldn't shake. She shouldn't have gone to the East Tower earlier. She knew that now. Lord Brennan had cornered her there, his breath reeking of wine and entitlement, his hands, God, his hands, reaching for her with the casual cruelty of a man who'd never been told no. She'd fought. She'd tried to scream. But in Thornfield Manor, screams were common and intervention was rare. His fingers had closed around her throat, squeezing until black dots danced across her vision. His face twisted with rage at her resistance. "You think you're special," he'd hissed. "You're nothing, less than nothing." When he finally released her, she collapsed to the floor, gasping, her neck burning where his hands had branded her skin. He'd left her there, crumpled, shaking, worthless. Now, hours later, Illyra stood frozen in the corridor, one hand unconsciously touching her throat. The skin felt hot, swollen. She didn't need a mirror to know what it looked like. "You're bleeding." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Illyra spun, the tray clattering from her hands, china shattering against stone. Her eyes darted through the shadows until they found him, standing at the far end of the hall, motionless as a statue carved from midnight itself. King Lucian. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was never in this wing. Yet there he stood, dressed in black that seemed to absorb the light around him, his pale face a study in sharp angles and ancient beauty, his eyes silver, luminous, inhuman, locked onto her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I'm not," she started, but her voice cracked. He moved then, not walked, moved. One moment he was at the corridor's end. The next he stood directly before her, so close she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his body. No heartbeat, no breath, just presence. Overwhelming, suffocating, absolute. Lucian's eyes dropped to her throat. Everything stopped. The rain ceased its hammering. The candles froze mid-flicker. Even Illyra's own heartbeat seemed to suspend in her chest as she watched his expression shift, from curiosity to recognition to something far more dangerous. Rage. Pure, crystalline, world-ending rage. But his hand, when it rose to her face, was impossibly gentle. His fingers, cold as winter, strong as iron, tilted her chin up with a tenderness that didn't match the storm brewing in his silver eyes. He studied the marks on her neck with the focus of a man reading a death sentence. Handprints. Clear, unmistakable, human handprints bruised into her pale skin. Who did this? The question was barely a whisper, yet it echoed to the corridor like thunder. Not a question at all, a promise. A declaration of war whispered in the dark. Illyra's throat closed. She wanted to speak, to explain, to beg him not to care, because caring in this place only led to worse pain. But no words came. Her silence was answer enough. Lucian's jaw tightened. His thumb traced the edge of one bruise with devastating care, and she saw something flicker across his face. Something that looked almost like pain. "You're under my protection," he said, his voice dropping even lower. Every soul in this manor knows that. Every creature, every servant, every lord who walks these halls. They know. You're mine. The words hung between them, heavy with meanings she didn't dare unpack. Possession, protection, something else entirely. He stepped back, and the temperature in the corridor plummeted. Frost crept across the stone walls. The candle flames turned blue. "Go to your room," Lucian commanded, though his eyes never left her throat. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. My lord, Go." Illyra fled. She ran to the corridors, her footsteps echoing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard it, the sound that would haunt the manor for days to come. The king's roar. Not human, not animal. Something ancient and furious and utterly inhuman. A sound that shook the foundations of Thornfield itself. Servants throughout the manor pressed themselves against walls, their faces white with terror. They knew that sound. Someone was going to die tonight. In the east wing, Lord Brennan sat in his private study, a glass of brandy in hand, already forgetting the girl he'd terrorized. He was nobility, after all, untouchable, protected by ancient bloodlines and political alliances. The door exploded inward. Lucian stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lightning from the windows behind him. His eyes blazed silver white, and when he smiled, his fangs gleamed like daggers. "My lord," Brennan stammered, rising from his chair. "I didn't expect." "Show me your hands." It wasn't a request. Brennan's face paled. He tucked his hand behind his back, but Lucian was already moving, crossing the room in a blur of shadow and fury. He grabbed Brennan's wrist, yanking his arm forward with inhuman strength. The nobleman's hands were unmarked clean, except for the faint red impressions on his fingers. The exact size, the exact shape. Lucian looked at those hands for a long, terrible moment. Then he smiled. "Do you know," the king whispered, his voice conversational, almost friendly, "how long it takes for a vampire to kill a man?" Brennan's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Please, I know she was yours. I didn't." "She's not an object to be owned," Lucian interrupted, his tone still terrifyingly calm. "She's a person, a living, breathing person who deserves your respect, your protection. Instead, you gave her pain." He crouched down, bringing himself eye level with the sobbing man. "So I'll give you pain in return, and I'll make sure it lasts." The screaming started then and didn't stop for hours. By dawn, Lord Brennan's body was found in the courtyard, drained completely of blood, his face frozen in permanent terror. The message was clear, written in violence and fury. No one touches what the king protects. And in her small room in the servants' quarters, Illyra lay awake, her fingers pressed against the bruises on her throat, wondering why a vampire king would care about a girl like her. The answer, she would learn, was far more complicated than revenge. It was destiny. 3 days passed in heavy silence. The manor felt different now, charged with tension, thick with unspoken fear. Lord Brennan's death had sent shockwaves through Thornfield's noble circles. Whispers spread like poison through the corridors. The king has gone mad. He killed one of his own for a servant. Nothing is safe anymore. Illyra kept the shadows, as she always had, but now the shadows felt different, protective, as if the darkness itself had wrapped around her like a cloak. She hadn't seen Lucian since that night. The bruises on her throat had deepened to purple-black before beginning their slow fade to yellow-green. Each morning, she wrapped a scarf around her neck, hiding the evidence, but everyone knew. The servants looked at her differently now, some with envy, others with pity, most with fear. She had become dangerous by association. On the 4th night, a summons came. A sealed letter, delivered by a pale-faced servant who wouldn't meet her eyes. The wax seal bore the king's crest, a crown of thorns wrapped around a blood moon. Her hands shook as she broke it open. My chambers. Midnight. Come alone. No signature. None needed. Ilara stood in her tiny room, staring at the letter until the words blurred. She should refuse. She should run. But where would she go? Thornfield walls stretched for miles, surrounded by forests where darker things and vampires prowled. And beyond that, a world that had rejected her long before she'd arrived at these gates. She had nowhere to run. So at midnight, she walked. The corridors were empty, the servants having learned to vanish after dark. Candles guttered in their sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach for her as she passed. Her footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence, each step a countdown to something inevitable. The king's chambers occupied the highest tower, a place of legend and nightmare. No servant entered uninvited. Few nobles dared. The double doors stood 12 feet tall, carved from black oak and inlaid with silver that gleamed like moonlight. Ilara raised her hand to knock. The doors opened before her knuckles touched wood. Enter. His voice came from within, soft as velvet, sharp as steel. She stepped inside, and the doors closed behind her with a sound like a coffin ceiling. The chamber was vast, circular, with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the storm-lashed landscape below. Lightning illuminated the room in staccato bursts, revealing glimpses of dark furniture, shelves lined with ancient books, weapons mounted on walls like trophies of forgotten wars. And in the center, standing before the largest window, Lucian. He didn't turn as she entered. His silhouette was perfectly still against the storm's fury, hands clasped behind his back, face tilted toward the tempest, as if reading meaning in its chaos. "You came," he said. "You commanded it, my lord. I gave you a choice." Now he turned, and the lightning behind him made his eyes flash silver white. "You could have refused." "Could I?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Sharp, bitter, real. Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Something worse. Recognition. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace where flames danced without heat. "Please." The please caught her off guard. Kings didn't say please. Not to servants. Ilara sat, perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to fly. Lucian moved to pour wine from a crystal decanter, dark red, almost black. He offered her a glass. "I don't drink," she whispered. "It's wine, not blood." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Though I understand your hesitation." He sat across from her, cradling his own glass, but not drinking. For a long moment, only the storm spoke, thunder rolling across the sky like the gods themselves were at war. "Do you know why you're here?" Lucian asked finally. "To punish me." His eyes snapped to hers, genuinely shocked. "Punish you? For causing trouble. Her voice broke. For getting a nobleman killed." Lucian set his glass down with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was low, dangerous with restrained emotion. "Ilara, look at me." She did, though it took every ounce of courage she possessed. "You caused nothing," he said, each word precise. "Lord Brennan chose violence. He chose to hurt you. His death was not your fault. It was justice. Justice." She tasted the word like poison. In what world is a servant worth more than a lord? In mine. The certainty in his voice made something crack inside her chest. Lucian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his face. The sharp cheekbones, the full lips, the eyes that held centuries of memory and pain. "I didn't bring you here to punish you," he said quietly. "I brought you here to explain." "Explain what?" "Why I can't let you go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications she didn't understand. Lucian stood, moving to the window, his back to her again. When he spoke, his voice was different. Older, weighted with exhaustion that transcended centuries. 300 years ago, I made a covenant with a witch. A powerful one, desperate and dying. She had been betrayed by those she trusted, left to bleed out in a forest while her murderers celebrated. Lightning struck close, illuminating his profile in stark white light. I found her, saved her, though I was too late to prevent her death. In gratitude, or perhaps in cruelty, she gave me a prophecy, a curse, a promise. He turned, and his eyes found hers across the room. She said I would walk this earth alone, unchanged, unmoved, until I met someone whose pain would break to my immortal indifference, someone whose suffering would feel like my own, someone marked by violence, saved by chance, bound by fate. Illyra's breath caught. She said when I found this person, I would know them by 3 signs. Lucian's voice dropped to barely a whisper. They would bear marks of cruelty on their throat. They would flinch from power, but not from truth. And they would make me feel. He paused, something raw crossing his face. Feel again after centuries of numbness. The silence stretched like a living thing. You think I'm... Illyra couldn't finish the sentence. I don't think. I know. Lucian moved closer, stopping just out of reach. When I saw those bruises on your neck, something inside me shattered. Rage, yes, but also recognition, as if I'd been waiting 3 centuries for that exact moment. That's insane. Yes. He smiled, sad and beautiful, but also true. Illyra stood, her legs shaky, her mind racing. What does this prophecy mean? What am I supposed to do? I don't know, Lucian admitted. The witch didn't specify. She only said finding you would change everything. For me, for this kingdom, for the balance between life and death itself. So I'm what? A catalyst? A tool? You're a person, Lucian said firmly, with choices, free will, agency. I won't force you into anything, except staying here. His expression darkened. The world beyond these walls is crueler than you know. If you leave, you'll be hunted. Not just by humans who fear what you represent, but by supernatural forces who want to use you as leverage against me. So I'm a prisoner. You're protected. It's the same thing. It's not. His control slipped, and for a moment, she saw the beast beneath the gentleman, ancient, powerful, barely restrained. The candles in the room flared, casting wild shadows. Then he breathed, and the moment passed. I'm sorry. I'm not accustomed to caring whether someone stays or goes. Illyra stared at him. This impossible creature, this king of darkness who claimed she'd awakened something in him. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Another part wanted to cry at the tragedy of it. If I stay, she said slowly, what happens? I protect you, teach you, help you understand what you are. I'm a servant. You're so much more. Lucian moved closer, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. There's power in you, Illyra. I can sense it. Dormant, sleeping, but there. The witch's prophecy didn't choose someone ordinary. His hand rose, hovering near her face, but not touching, as if asking permission. She didn't pull away. His fingers brushed her cheek, ice against warmth, death against life. But gentle, always so impossibly gentle. Stay, he whispered, not as a servant, not as a prisoner, but as what you were meant to be. And what's that? We'll discover together. Illyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a cloak made of starlight and shadow. She thought of the life she'd left behind. Poverty, cruelty, meaninglessness. She thought of Lord Brennan's hands on her throat, the casual violence of a world that saw her as disposable. Then she thought of Lucian's rage on her behalf, his gentleness, the way he'd called her mine with such absolute certainty. She opened her eyes. Teach me, then show me what I'm supposed to become. Lucian's expression transformed. Relief, joy, something deeper that had no name. He took her hand, his cold fingers wrapping around her warm ones, and she felt it. A connection forging between them, ancient and new, destined and chosen. It begins tomorrow, he said. But tonight, you rest. Your room has been changed. You'll find it in the West Wing, near my own chambers. More comfortable, more befitting your new position, which is... He smiled, enigmatic and beautiful, undefined, and therefore infinite. As Illyra left his chambers, escorted by silent guards to her new quarters, she touched her throat where the bruises had begun to fade. They would disappear soon, leaving only memory. But memory, she was learning, had its own kind of permanence. And in the highest tower, Lucian stood alone, staring at his hand, the one that had touched her face, and marveled at the impossible warmth still lingering on his frozen skin. The Covenant had begun. The West Wing existed in a different reality than the servants' quarters. Where Alara's previous room had been cramped and cold, this new chamber was vast. Cathedral ceilings, arched windows that overlooked moonlit gardens, furniture that belonged in palaces. A four-poster bed draped in deep burgundy silk. A fireplace that burned with enchanted flames, providing light without heat. Bookshelves lined with volumes in languages she couldn't read. She stood in the center of it all, feeling like an imposter. The dresses in the wardrobe are your size. Alara spun to find a woman standing in the doorway, tall, elegant, with silver hair that cascaded down her back like liquid moonlight. Her eyes were violet, distinctly inhuman, and her smile held secrets. "I'm Morrigan," the woman said, gliding into a room with supernatural grace. "The king's advisor, among other things. Other things. Which? Seer, occasional voice of reason, though he rarely listens." Morrigan circled Alara slowly, studying her with disconcerting intensity. "So you're the one. I don't know what I am." "Good. Self-awareness is the beginning of wisdom." Morrigan gestured, and the fireplace flared brighter. "The king has asked me to begin your education. You have much to learn, and time is more limited than you realize." "Why?" Morrigan's expression darkened. "Because the prophecy that brought you here has also awakened others. Ancient forces long dormant are stirring. They sense the change in the cosmic balance. Some will want to protect you. Others will want you dead." Fear coiled in Alara's stomach. "I didn't ask for this." Destiny rarely asks permission. Morrigan moved to the window, looking out at the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "But you're stronger than you know. The witch who made the covenant with Lucian. She saw something in your bloodline, in your soul. Power that's been sleeping for generations." "What kind of power?" "That," Morrigan said, turning with a mysterious smile, "is what we're going to discover." The training began at dawn. Alara followed Morrigan through corridors she'd never seen before, descending into bowels of the manor, where ancient stone gave way to older construction. Foundations that predated Thornfield, built by civilizations whose names were forgotten. They entered a circular chamber lit by floating orbs of pale light. Symbols covered the walls. Protection wards, Morrigan explained, to contain whatever emerged during the awakening process. "Sit," Morrigan instructed, pointing to a circle inscribed on the floor. Alara hesitated. "What are you going to do?" "Test your limits. Push past your fears. Show you what you're capable of." Morgan's voice was firm but not unkind. "It won't be comfortable." "Will it hurt?" "Yes." At least she was honest. Alara sat cross-legged in the circle, her heart hammering. Morrigan began to chant in a language that sounded like wind through dead trees, her hands weaving patterns in the air. The symbols on the walls began to glow. Then the pain started. Not physical, worse. Memories erupted in Alara's mind with violent clarity. Her childhood, poverty, hunger, watching her mother die from illness they couldn't afford to treat. Her teenage years, sold to a factory where children worked until their fingers bled. The years of abuse, cruelty, invisibility. Every wound she'd ever received, physical and emotional, blazed a life simultaneously. She screamed, "Don't fight it!" Morgan's voice cut through the agony. "Let it flow through you. Pain is just energy. Transform it." But Alara couldn't. The memories were too much, too real. She was drowning in her own suffering, pulled under by waves of trauma that never seemed to end. Then a crack. Something inside her broke open and light poured out. The orbs in the chamber exploded. The symbols on the walls flared so bright, they burned afterimages into the air. And Alara felt it, power, raw and ancient, surging through her veins like liquid fire. When the light faded, she was standing, though she didn't remember rising. Her hands glowed with a soft, golden luminescence, and the air around her shimmered with heat. Morgan stared at her, violet eyes wide with shock. "Impossible!" the witch whispered. What did I do? You awakened. Morgan moved closer, studying the light emanating from Alara's skin. But this is soul fire, celestial energy. It hasn't been seen in this world for over 1,000 years. What does it mean? It means you're not just human. Morgan's voice trembled with awe. You carry the blood of Nephilim, the children of angels and mortals, a forbidden lineage, hunted to extinction centuries ago. Alara looked at her glowing hands, terror and wonder warring in her chest. How is that possible? Your ancestors must have hidden their nature, diluting the bloodline through generations of purely human matches. But the power never truly died. It only slept, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. And that moment is now. The moment Lucian's covenant recognized you, Morgan said grimly, your suffering called to him because you're two halves of an ancient balance. Darkness and light, death and life, vampire and angel blood. The door to the chamber burst open. Lucian stood in the entrance, his eyes wild, his face pale even by vampire standards. He must have felt the energy surge from across the manor. What happened? He demanded, then stopped short, seeing Alara's glowing form. What is this? She awakened. Morgan said simply, and she's far more than we anticipated. Lucian moved toward Alara slowly, as if approaching something sacred. When he reached her, he raised his hand, hesitating just before touching the light emanating from her skin. Does it hurt? He asked softly. No. Alara's voice was distant, wonderstruck. It feels, right, like I've been holding my breath my entire life, and I finally remembered how to breathe. Lucian's hand closed a final distance, his cold fingers brushing her warm, glowing skin. Instead of recoiling, his touch seemed to stabilize the light, grounding it, giving it shape and purpose. The glow shifted from gold to silver white, swirling around both of them like living starlight. The prophecy, Morgan breathed. When darkness touches light, when death embraces life, the world will tremble. That's what she said. This is what she meant. Lucian and Alara stood together in the center of the chamber, surrounded by impossible light. And for the first time since his turning 3 centuries ago, Lucian felt warmth in his dead veins. Not heat, not fire. Life. What are we? Alara whispered. Lucian's eyes met hers, silver reflecting gold, an eclipse made flesh. Something new, he answered. Something the world has never seen. The days that followed were a blur of discovery and danger. Alara trained relentlessly with Morgan, learning to control the soul fire that burned within her. It wasn't just light. It was creation itself, the fundamental energy that gave life to the universe. She could heal wounds with a touch, burn through dark magic, even glimpse futures that hadn't yet solidified into certainty. But power came with a price. Each time she used the soul fire, she felt something inside her burn away. Mortality, perhaps, or the simple human girl she'd once been. She was transforming into something else, and she wasn't sure if she mourned the loss or celebrated the evolution. Lucian watched her transformation with an expression that shifted between pride and pain. He trained with her too, teaching her combat, strategy, the brutal realities of surviving in a world where power meant everything. Their connection deepened with each passing day. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something stranger, more profound. When they were near each other, her light and his darkness balanced perfectly, creating a harmony that felt written into the fabric of reality itself. They would sit together in the library after training, her reading ancient texts while he managed kingdom affairs. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply existed in comfortable silence. One night, as moonlight streamed through the windows, Alara closed her book and looked at him. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Being human?" Lucian considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I miss the simplicity, the certainty of death, which made life precious. But if I'd stayed human, I'd never have met you. You don't know that." "I do." His silver eyes found hers. "The covenant was always leading to this moment. Every choice I made, every year I survived, it was all to be here now with you. That's a lot of pressure. I didn't say you had to save me." He smiled, rare and genuine. just that you changed everything by existing. Before Alara could respond, the windows exploded inward. Glass shattered across the library floor, and through the opening came creatures of nightmare, demons with skin like obsidian, eyes like coals, teeth like razors. 6 of them, moving with inhuman speed, their target clear. Alara. Lucian moved like lightning, intercepting the first demon mid-leap, his hands tearing through its chest with surgical precision. Black blood sprayed across ancient books as the creature dissolved into ash. But there were too many coming too fast. One reached Alara before she could react, its clawed hand closing around her throat, an echo of Lord Brennan's violence, but so much worse. She felt its touch like acid, burning through skin, seeking her heart, her light, her very soul. Terror froze her. Then rage melted the ice. The soul fire exploded outward, not controlled, not shaped, pure, raw energy detonating from her center like a star going supernova. The demon holding her incinerated instantly. The others screamed as the light consumed them, their bodies burning to nothing before the flames even touched them. When the light faded, the library was destroyed. Furniture reduced to ash, walls scorched black, the ceiling cracked and unstable. And in the center of the devastation, Alara stood alone, her body wreathed in fading golden flames, her eyes glowing with celestial fire. Lucian stared at her from across the room, his expression caught between awe and something that looked like fear. "Alara," he said carefully, "come back." She looked down at her hands, seeing the destruction she'd caused. Horror crashed through her. "I know." He moved toward her slowly, ignoring the heat still radiating from her skin. "I know, but you need to control it or it will consume you." "I can't." "You can." Lucian reached her, taking her burning hands in his cold ones without hesitation. "Feel me. Use me as an anchor. Dark to your light. Death to your life." Alara focused on a connection between them, his cold seeping into her heat, his darkness tempering her light. Slowly, the flames receded. The glow faded. She collapsed forward, and he caught her, holding her against his chest where no heart beat. "They came for me," she whispered into his shirt. "They'll keep coming," Lucian said grimly. "Word has spread. The half-blood angel has awakened, bonded to the vampire king. Every force that seeks to control the balance of power will want you, dead or captured." Alara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Then what do we do?" Lucian's expression hardened into something ancient and terrible, the face of a king who'd ruled for 3 centuries through cunning and ruthless strength. "We go to war," he said simply, "and we show them why threatening what I protect is the last mistake they'll ever make." As guards flooded into the destroyed library and Morgan arrived to tend to Alara's injuries, the vampire king stood at the shattered window, looking out at a world that had just become infinitely more dangerous. The awakening was complete. Now came the true test, survival. War came swiftly, and it came with fangs. Within a week of the demon attack, Thornfield Manor transformed from a Gothic sanctuary into a fortress under siege. The transformation was total, absolute. Every corridor became a strategic choke point, every window a potential breach, every shadow a place where enemies might materialize. Lucian called in every ally, every dead ode, every creature that still feared or respected his name. They came from across the continent. Ancient vampires who remembered when Rome still stood, werewolf packs from the northern mountains, rogue witches who'd abandoned their covens but still honored the old codes. The courtyards filled with supernatural warriors, their movements predatory and precise, each one a weapon honed by centuries of survival. Morgan worked without rest, her fingers weaving protective wards that shimmered in the air like heat mirages, layering the manor in ancient magic. She drew from ley lines buried deep beneath Thornfield's foundations, tapping into power that predated human civilization. The walls hummed with energy, and the air itself tasted of copper and ozone. And at the center of it all, Alara trained. Not gently, not carefully, with the desperation of someone who understood that weakness meant death. Not just for her, but for everyone she'd come to care about. Lucian was relentless as her instructor. He pushed her past exhaustion, past fear, past the limit she thought she had. Swordplay until her arms screamed and her hands bled through her training gloves. Strategy sessions that lasted until dawn, studying ancient battle formations and supernatural combat tactics. Control exercises where she had to maintain her soul fire at exact intensities for hours without wavering, balancing the raw power that wanted to explode outward with the precision needed for surgical strikes. Again, he would say, cold and merciless, when she collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. The enemy won't wait for you to rest. They won't care that you're tired. Again, she hated him in those moments. Hated the pitiless assessment in his silver eyes, the way he watched her fail without offering comfort, the brutal efficiency with which he dismantled every defense she tried to build. She also understood he was trying to keep her alive. Every bruise, every strained muscle, every moment of burning humiliation when she couldn't execute a technique he demonstrated once and expected her to master, it was all armor. Training written into muscle memory so deep that when the real battle came, her body would know what to do even when her mind froze with terror. On the 8th night, intelligence arrived that changed everything. Morgan burst into the training hall where Alara was practicing defensive spells, her violet eyes wide with alarm, her silver hair disheveled for the first time since Alara had met her. Lucian appeared moments later, moving with the preternatural speed that still startled Alara, despite her growing familiarity with his nature. He materialized from shadow as if the darkness itself had given him form. "They're coming," Morgan said without preamble, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Tomorrow night, the Covenant of Shadows, a coalition of demons, rogue vampires, and dark sorcerers. They put aside centuries of rivalry, generations of blood feuds, and territorial disputes, because they all want the same thing. Me," Alara finished, her voice flat, emotionless. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building like pressure before a storm. "Your power," Lucian corrected, though his expression was grim. Shadows gathered in the hollows of his cheeks. "The soul fire is the only force in this world that can permanently destroy supernatural entities. No resurrection, no reformation, no coming back as something worse. True death, final death. They can't allow that weapon to exist freely, unclaimed, outside their control. So, they're coming to kill me." Alara set down her practice sword, her hand steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Or capture you," Morgan added, moving to the tactical map spread across the training hall's central table. "Force you to serve their purposes. Drain your blood for rituals that could destabilize the supernatural world. Use you as a hostage against Lucian, leverage to destroy the most powerful vampire king in 3 centuries. She paused, her violet eyes meeting Alara's. Death might be kinder than what they had planned. Silence fell over the hall, heavy with implications that no one wanted to voice. Alara looked between Morgan and Lucian, seeing the calculations behind their eyes, the tactical assessments, the probability matrices, the cold mathematics of survival. They were preparing for battle, yes, but also for loss, for the possibility that tomorrow night everything would end in blood and ash and failure. "How many?" Alara asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Over 200 confirmed," Lucian said quietly, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the map surface. "Maybe more. Our scouts were killed before they could get exact numbers. It's the largest supernatural army assembled in 50 years, perhaps longer. And we have 63 fighters." Lucian's jaw tightened. "More against wards, which will hold for a time. And you, the odds were impossible. Mathematically, tactically, logically, they were already dead." Alara moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds where warriors prepared weapons and reinforced barriers. She watched the vampires sharpening silver-edged blades with movements too fast for human eyes to track. Saw a werewolf testing the tensile strength of enchanted chains. Observed witches inscribing protection runes into the very stones of Thornfield's walls. These creatures, vampires, witches, werewolves, beings she'd only known from nightmares and folklore, were preparing to die for her. A servant girl they didn't know, defending a power they didn't fully understand, standing against an army that should terrify them into submission. "I could leave," she said softly, her breath fogging the cold glass. Draw them away from Thornfield. If I'm not here, maybe they'll pursue me instead. You can negotiate, make peace. They'll raise Thornfield anyway. Lucian appeared beside her with that unsettling supernatural silence, his reflection absent in the glass. A reminder of what he was, what he'd always be. This isn't just about you anymore, Ilera. It's about power, territory, the message it sends to every supernatural faction from here to the eastern seas. If they destroy me for protecting you, if they prove that even I can be broken, every supernatural alliance in the world fractures overnight. Chaos spreads. Old feuds reignite. The world burns. So we fight. Not a question. A statement of terrible fact. We fight. He turned to face her fully, and she saw something in his expression that stopped her breath. Vulnerability, raw and bleeding and utterly human despite the monster he'd become. But Ilera, I need you to promise me something. She met his silver eyes, seeing past the ancient power to the fear beneath. This creature who'd walked the earth for 3 centuries, who'd killed thousands, who commanded armies and bent kingdoms to his will. He was afraid, not for himself, but for her. If the battle turns, Lucian said, his voice barely above a whisper, each word carefully chosen. If we're losing and they breach the inner sanctum, you run. Morgan has prepared an escape route through the catacombs. It leads to a safe house 50 miles north. You'll find supplies, money, contacts who can get you to the continent. Promise me you'll use it. I won't leave you. Promise me. His hands gripped her shoulders with desperate intensity, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. 300 years I've walked this earth. Ilera, 3 centuries of emptiness, of going through motions without meaning, watching civilizations rise and fall and feeling nothing. Nothing. Then you appeared, this impossible, stubborn, brilliant girl, and suddenly I remember what it felt like to want tomorrow to come. I can't watch you die. I won't. If that makes me selfish, if that makes me a coward, I don't care. Promise me. Tears burned in Ilera's eyes, hot against the cold air. You might not have a choice. Then I'll make one. Lucian's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek, the gesture achingly tender. I'll always make the choice that keeps you alive, even if it costs me everything. Even if it costs me this kingdom, this power, this immortal existence. You're worth more than all of it. In that moment, Ilera understood what she'd been denying for weeks, what she'd been too afraid to acknowledge even in the privacy of her own thoughts. This wasn't just a cosmic connection forged by ancient prophecy, not merely a balance of powers written in the stars, not simply 2 halves of an impossible whole finding completion. She loved him, this impossible, infuriating, beautiful creature of darkness. She loved him with an intensity that terrified her, that made her previous understanding of the word seem like a child's conception of the ocean. She loved him with every fiber of her being, with a soul fire that burned in her veins and the humanity she'd clung to despite everything trying to strip it away. Lucian. The warning bells shattered the moment. Great bronze bells mounted in Thornfield's highest tower, their sound designed to carry for miles, to shake the very foundations of the earth. They weren't supposed to ring until tomorrow night. The plan had been to use the remaining time for final preparations, for rest, for the kind of quiet moments soldiers steal before battle. But the sound echoed across the grounds now, urgent and terrifying, signaling only one thing. The enemy had arrived early. They'd been betrayed. Chaos erupted instantly. Warriors flooded into position with the precision of long practice, weapons drawn, supernatural abilities crackling in the air like lightning seeking ground. Morrigan's wards flared to life in visible waves, creating shimmering barriers around the manor's perimeter that looked like reality itself was bending. And from a forest beyond Thornfield's walls, from the darkness between ancient trees, they came, an army of nightmares made flesh. Demons moved like shadows given form, their bodies shifting and reshaping to avoid attacks, sliding between dimensions in ways that hurt to watch. Their eyes burned with hellfire, and their voices were screams that had no source. Rogue vampires charged with berserker fury, having abandoned the codes and restrictions that made Lucian's kind civilized, reverting to monsters that had terrorized medieval Europe. Dark sorcerers hung back, their hands weaving spells that turned air into weapons and earth into traps, manipulating reality with gestures that left burning afterimages in the night. The first wave hit the outer wards with devastating force. Magic collided with magic, creating explosions that lit up the night like daylight, like the sun itself had been dragged down to witness this apocalypse. The wards held barely, but Alara could see Morgan straining at the center of the defensive web, sweat beading on her forehead despite the winter cold. Her violet eyes blazing with power as she channeled energy from sources that would kill a lesser witch. How long can the wards last? Alara shouted over the sound of battle, over the screams and explosions and the terrible grinding noise of reality being torn apart and poorly stitched back together. An hour. Morgan gritted out through clenched teeth, blood beginning to trickle from her nose. Maybe 2 if I burn my entire life force. Maybe 3 if I'm willing to die for it. Don't you dare, Lucian commanded, already moving toward the front lines, his body shifting into something more predatory, more monstrous. I need you alive to coordinate defense. Die after we win, not before. He turned to Alara one last time, his expression a mixture of determination and heartbreak, love and resignation. Stay in the inner sanctum, he said, and it wasn't a request. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, no matter if you think I'm dying, stay safe. Promise me. Then he was gone, a blur of darkness and death, joining his warriors at the walls where the first breaches were already forming. Alara stood frozen for 1 heartbeat. 2, 3. Then she made a decision. She ran. Not toward the inner sanctum where Lucian wanted her safe and useless, but toward the armory where weapons waited for hands willing to wield them. If she was going to survive this night, she needed to fight, not hide like a prize to be claimed by whichever side won. The soul fire burned within her, eager for release, practically screaming to be used, and she'd learned enough control to channel it into something besides raw destruction. The armory was chaos, warriors grabbing weapons, blessing blades, preparing for what might be their last battle. Alara pushed through to the enchanted weapons section, ignoring the stares, the whispered questions about what the king's prize was doing here instead of cowering in safety. She grabbed a short sword, silver-edged, blessed by Morgan with runes that glowed faintly blue, designed to channel magical energy without shattering. It felt right in her hand, balanced and deadly in hers. Then she ran toward the sounds of battle, toward the screaming and dying and the terrible music of war. The courtyards were hell-given architecture. Bodies lay scattered across ancient cobblestones, both allies and enemies, their blood mixing into dark pools that reflected firelight like mirrors into the abyss. Warriors fought with desperate intensity, knowing this might be their last stand, knowing that dawn might never come. Alara saw a vampire she trained with, a warrior named Marcus who taught her how to use supernatural speed without losing accuracy. Torn apart by 3 demons, his final scream cut short as they ripped him into pieces too small to regenerate from. She saw a werewolf take a sorcerer's spell to the chest and dissolve into ash, his howl of defiance becoming silence. Death was everywhere, casual and cruel and inevitable. Alara pushed forward, searching for Lucian through the chaos, her soul fire igniting instinctively to defend against attacks she didn't consciously register. A demon lunged at her from the shadows, its claws extended to tear out her throat. She didn't think. Training took over, muscle memory faster than conscious thought. She pivoted, brought her sword up in a defensive arc, while channeling light through the blade. The demon exploded into nothing, not even ash remaining. More came, drawn to the beacon of her power like moths to flame. She fought like something feral, all training and instinct and the desperate need to survive. Her blade became a blur of silver light, cutting through enemies with surgical precision. The soul fire responded to her rage, her fear, her desperate need to protect the people fighting for her, channeling through her strikes to devastating effect. She was magnificent and terrifying, a fusion of human determination and celestial power, and the enemy began to give her space, began to understand that this wasn't prey but predator. Then she saw him, Lucian at the center of a whirlwind of violence, surrounded by enemies, fighting with the grace of centuries and the fury of something far older than vampire kind. His movements were poetry written in violence, dodge, strike, kill, repeat. Each motion economical, perfect, deadly. But even his supernatural speed couldn't handle these numbers forever. She could see him slowing, infinitesimal hesitations creeping into his attacks as exhaustion ground him down. A sorcerer appeared behind him, emerging from a shadow portal. Spell already forming in hands that glowed with necromantic power. Death magic coalesced into a spear of pure darkness, aimed directly at Lucian's heart, designed to permanently destroy even an immortal. Elara didn't scream, didn't hesitate. She ran, faster than she'd ever moved, pushing past physical limits, her soul fire igniting so brightly she became a comet streaking across the battlefield. Warriors on both sides stumbled back from her passage, blinded by the radiance. She reached Lucian just as the death spell released, throwing herself between him and the attack with absolute certainty that this was right, that this was what she was meant to do. The spell hit her square in the chest. Pain exploded through every nerve, every cell, every particle of her being. Death magic, the antithesis of her soul fire, the cosmic opposite of everything she was, tried to consume her from the inside. She felt herself dying, felt the light dimming like a candle guttering the wind, felt everything she was beginning to unravel into the void. Then Lucian's hands were on her face, his voice in her ear, and she'd never heard such raw anguish and sound. No, 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 no. Elara, stay with me. Stay. Don't you dare leave me. Don't you dare. She tried to speak, tried to tell him it was worth it, that she'd make the same choice again. But blood filled her mouth. The world was going dark, cold, empty. She could feel herself slipping away, mortality catching up with cosmic debts she'd unknowingly accrued. Lucian looked at the wound, the massive catastrophic damage where death magic had torn through her chest, and his expression twisted through a dozen emotions in a heartbeat. Anguish, rage, despair, then, finally, terrible resolve. "Forgive me," he whispered. Then he bit her, not to feed, though the scent of her blood must have been overwhelming, not to drain, though her life was already fleeing, but to transform, to bind her to immortality before mortality could claim her completely. His venom flooded her veins like liquid ice, racing toward her heart, fighting the death magic that was trying to consume her from within. It should have failed. Vampire venom couldn't turn someone with angel blood. The two forces were fundamentally incompatible. It should have killed her instantly, holy power and undead poison destroying each other, and her in the process. But something impossible happened. The soul fire and the venom didn't fight. They recognized each other. They merged. Light and darkness, life and death, angel and vampire, fusing into something that had never existed before, something that broke every law of supernatural existence. Elara's body convulsed, caught between transformation and destruction, dying and being reborn simultaneously, becoming something entirely new. Her back arched, her mouth open in a scream that had no sound. And when her eyes opened, they glowed silver gold. Lucian's color merged with her own, creating something unprecedented. The death spell's damage healed instantly, flesh knitting back together with supernatural speed. The wounds closed, leaving not even scars. And when she stood, power radiated from her in waves that made even the demons step back in terror, that made rogue vampires reconsider their life choices, that made sorcerer spells falter and fail. She was no longer human. That mortality had been consumed by transformation. No longer purely angel-blooded. That celestial essence had been tempered by darkness. Not vampire either. She still breathed, her heart still beat, warmth still flowed through her veins. She was all three and none, a hybrid that shouldn't exist. A fusion of opposing forces that should have destroyed each other, but instead created something transcendent, something that rewrote the rules simply by existing. The sorcerer who'd cast the death spell looked at her with dawning horror, his dark magic faltering as he understood what he'd accidentally created. "Impossible," he breathed. Elara smiled, and her fangs gleamed silver bright, reflecting moonlight like captured stars. "Watch me." She moved, not with vampire speed alone, or human determination, or angelic grace, but with something beyond all three. She crossed the courtyard in less than a heartbeat, her sword a blur of silver light that left trails of radiance in the air. The sorcerer tried to defend himself, try to raise shields and counterspells, but she was already past his defenses, her blade piercing his heart with absolute precision. He crumbled to ash, his final expression frozen in disbelief. The battlefield fell silent. Both armies, ally and enemy alike, stared at this new creature that stood among them, wreathed in light that didn't burn and shadow that didn't conceal. She was visible and invisible simultaneously, alive and undead, holy and damned, all contradictions resolved into impossible harmony. She was impossible, and she was furious. "You came to my home," Ilara said, her voice carrying across the battlefield with supernatural clarity, resonating with harmonics that shouldn't exist in nature. "You threatened my people. You try to destroy the only place I've ever belonged, the only place that ever wanted me." The soul fire exploded outward, but controlled now, shaped by vampire precision and human will and something else entirely. It swept across the battlefield like a tidal wave of celestial fire, burning through enemy forces with absolute precision. Demons dissolved without even time to scream. Rogue vampires incinerated, their immortality meaningless against this power. Dark sorcerers' magic shattered like glass against diamond, as their spells encountered force they couldn't comprehend or counter. In 30 seconds, the battle was over. The surviving enemies fled into the forest, their coalition broken, their confidence shattered, their absolute certainty of victory transformed into absolute terror. They'd come for a weapon, expecting to claim or destroy a source of power. Instead, they'd found something far more terrifying. A being who commanded both light and darkness with equal mastery, who stood at the intersection of life and death and made that crossroads a throne. When the soul fire finally receded, when the light dimmed to something approaching normal, Ilara stood alone in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by ash and silence and the stunned survivors of both armies. Lucian approached slowly, cautiously, as if uncertain whether she'd recognize him, whether the transformation had consumed the person he'd known and loved. "Ilara?" His voice was soft, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard. Are you still you?" She turned, and her eyes, those impossible silver gold eyes, found his. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice still her own but layered with new harmonics. "I feel everything and nothing. Human memories and vampire instincts. The warmth of soul fire and the cold of death. Hunger for blood and hunger for justice." She looked at her hands, seeing both light and shadow dancing across her skin in patterns that shifted like living things. "What am I?" Lucian reached her. His hands cupped her face with the same gentleness he'd always shown her, as if she were something precious and fragile despite the devastating power she'd just demonstrated. "You're Ilara," he said firmly, with absolute conviction. "Whatever else you become, that core remains. I can see it in your eyes, the girl who refused to hide, who chose to fight, who threw herself in front of a death spell for a creature like me. You're still her. You'll always be her." Tears streaked down her face. Still warm, still salt water, still human in that small but fundamental way. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know." He pulled her close, and for the first time, their embrace felt balanced. Not cold against warm, death against life, immortal against mortal, but equal, two halves of an impossible whole, finding completion in each other's contradictions. "I know, but we'll figure this out. Together, like we always have, like we always will." Around them, the survivors began to emerge in their defensive positions, warriors wounded but alive, Morgan exhausted but smiling with genuine joy. They looked at their defenders with awe and gratitude, understanding that they'd witnessed something unprecedented. Thornfield Manor had survived, and at its heart stood two creatures who rewrote reality simply by existing together. 3 months later, as winter settled over the manor with soft snow and quiet nights, Ilara stood in a library they'd rebuilt together. Books lined the walls again, though many were new. Texts on hybrid creatures gathered from across the world, treatises on balancing opposing powers, philosophical works on forging new paths when old rules no longer applied. Lucian entered, carrying 2 glasses of wine, one red for him, one with a blend they discovered she could tolerate in her new form. He handed her the glass, and they stood together at the window, looking out at snow-covered grounds where peace had finally settled. "Do you regret it?" He asked quietly, the question he'd been afraid to voice until now. Becoming this? Illyria considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She thought about the servant girl she'd been, invisible, powerless, waiting to die forgotten in some corner of the world. Then she thought about who she was now. Powerful, yes, but also protected, purposeful, part of something larger than survival. No, she said finally, I regret the pain it took to get here. The violence, the lives lost defending someone they barely knew. But becoming this, she gestured herself to him, to the connection between them that grew stronger each day. This feels right. Like all the suffering, all the cruelty I endured, led somewhere meaningful instead of nowhere. Lucian smiled, rare, genuine, beautiful in its simplicity. The prophecy said you'd change everything. I don't think even the witch understood how literally that would manifest. You didn't just change me or this kingdom. You changed the fundamental rules of what's possible. We're still figuring out those new rules, Illyria admitted, taking a sip of her wine and feeling it warm her in ways both human and not. But at least we're writing them ourselves. Together. She leaned against him, feeling his cold solidity, her own warm darkness creating perfect balance. They stood together as snow fell outside, two impossible beings who'd found completion in each other's contradictions, who'd proven that sometimes the most beautiful things are born from the most impossible circumstances. The covenant was fulfilled, the awakening complete, and their story was just beginning. In the years to come, they would face more challenges, more enemies who couldn't accept what they represented, more moments where the balance they'd created would be tested. But they'd face it together. Light and dark, life and death, love and eternity merge into something unprecedented. Some endings are beginnings, some curses are blessings, and some monsters are the most human of all.